This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, where today we are getting you set for a jam-packed week number 5 of college football by talking to Ryan McCrystal of Sharp Football Analysis, getting his thoughts on some of the biggest games this week and his favorite bets for week number 5. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. And Ed, the past couple weeks in college football, the slates have been just okay. This week, though, there are 4 separate games that feature undefeated teams on both sides. So it's going to be a rock star type slate. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm actually probably most excited about this Michigan at Wisconsin game, which doesn't fall in that category. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I had Notre Dame overrated at the beginning of the year, and I believe that to be true, although it hasn't shown up in the win-loss column. So that Cincy at Notre Dame game means a lot to me. I think Cincinnati is a great story. I mean, if I'm not sure about their offense, but that defense is pretty awesome. And that'll be a fun contest.
Yeah, it's certainly where we're talking about that game. We're going to break down the Ole Miss Alabama game with Lane Kiffin discussion coming up and the way they play the way they play things. Arkansas, Georgia. We're not going to touch on Baylor versus Oklahoma State, but another matchup of undefeateds. Either way, going to be a pretty fun week of college football this week. We'll break that down with Ryan McCrystal. We've had him on the show before, back when he was with numberFire. Now with Sharp Football Analysis. A lot of smart people over there. A lot of people I respect a lot with Ryan at Sharp Football Analysis. You can find Ryan on Twitter at Ryan_McCrystal. We'll talk to him about week 5 of college football in just a bit. But first, a quick reminder to make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. We have college football right now. Tomorrow, we're talking NFL with Andy Molitor. You know Andy, of course. We've had him on here a bunch of times breaking down week number 4 of NFL with Andy. Tomorrow, that should be up sometime around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, getting you set for the week 4 slate. So make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, leave us a rating and review as well. Now, before we talk to Ryan, we got to go back to last week, talk about that Notre Dame game from last week, and go through what went wrong, what went right in week 4 of college football.
Covering the past.
Last week here on Covering the Spread, we had Pamela Maldonado on to talk week 4 of college football. Find Pamela on Twitter at PamelaM35 and check out all of her work over on Yahoo. Pamela started things off on Friday with Liberty versus Syracuse. I didn't go. Should have gone. I was in Syracuse. We have had good luck with Friday games in Syracuse. They upset Clemson on a Friday night. Didn't go this time. Should have gone because they upset Liberty. Pamela had Liberty -6, closed to 6.5. So a half point of value there for her. But Syracuse's defense stepped up. They kept it scoreless in the first quarter. They were up 14-0 early in the second quarter. Liberty fought back to tie it up with 14:31 left, but Syracuse hit a field goal at the buzzer to win this outright and cover. And Ed, the sentiment is pretty mixed around Syracuse, at Syracuse, like in the area. It seems like people are still hesitant to buy in, and I get that. What are your numbers saying about the Syracuse team right now? Putting you on the spot.
Let's see. I mean, not great.
Okay.
83rd in my predictive model that I use for members on my site.
Well,
so not quite there yet.
The skepticism makes sense then, for sure. But kudos to them for defeating Liberty and covering there. The big one for Pamela and for you was Notre Dame versus Wisconsin. Pamela was on Notre Dame +6.5. You had Wisconsin laying the points. It closed at Wisconsin -6. That line bounced up and down all around. It seemed like the entire week. Closed at -6. And it was a close game early on. Wisconsin had a 3-point lead early in the fourth quarter. You look at the final score, you would never know that was the case. Notre Dame kickoff return touchdown, 2 pick sixes in the final 3 minutes. So Notre Dame won 41-13 to get the cover for Pamela. And Ed, you were talking about how you're still skeptical of Notre Dame and how the underlying numbers probably haven't changed based on that game, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, what do you mean? The underlying numbers?
I'm guessing that your numbers are not super enthused about Notre Dame, despite a 41-13 win there. My guess.
Well, I mean, they kind of have to adjust Notre Dame up, right? Because there probably should be some asymmetry in that result, which is not something my model does at this point. But I have a underlying model that looks at yards per play and yards and figures out what the expected score should be. And in that model, Wisconsin won by 8, which is exactly what our prediction was. Clearly, that's not how we judge bets.
Right.
So the turnovers. I mean, Wisconsin just. Graham Mertz was terrible. I don't know how else to put it. He was terrible, and you can't have terrible quarterback play even against an overrated Notre Dame team. So yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, I bet it at 5.5. So, and then watch that line yo-yo back and forth between 6.5 and 5.5. I think you said it landed on 6 at FanDuel.
6, yeah, yep.
So, yeah, I don't know. These things move fast, and that's part of the hard part of doing media, right?
Right.
Is I'm betting the game. I don't remember exactly what happened, but either hours or up to 24 hours before I'm talking about it, and
right.
But that's how it goes. We'll talk about this later. I have no idea what to think about Wisconsin, but I don't think much of what I thought about Notre Dame changed much.
Yeah, I think it's there are always good examples of why final score is not always indicative of the way the game actually went. And I think this is one of the better examples of that. But good on Pamela for getting the cover there. And then she nailed everything with Arkansas versus Texas A&M, like across the board. So Pamela wanted to take the points at plus 5.5, thought that Arkansas could win the game outright, and wanted under 47.5. She got positive movement, but also everything hit. Arkansas did the dang thing. They won that one. 20-10. So a great call there by Pamela, great diagnosis, both on that one and the Notre Dame game. And I wish I had taken heed on her thoughts on Arkansas because I did not. And literally like every point that she said was correct.
Where did it close at FanDuel?
It closed at 5.
Did it close at 5?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I saw some 3.5 out there, but
it was Texas A&M by 5, and then total went down to 47.
Okay.
From what I saw, at least.
I mean, I think I'm mistaken about the 3.5. Okay.
Yeah, but like either way, movement in her favor, a win in the back pocket for an underdog there too. So make sure you check out Pamela on Twitter at PamelaM35 and find all of her work over at Yahoo after a successful week number 4. We got to put some pressure now on Ryan McCrystal with Pamela doing so well last week. We'll see what Ryan can do again. He is of Sharp Football Analysis. You can find him on Twitter at Ryan_McCrystal. We'll talk to him in just a second about week number 5. But first, hey, football fans, FanDuel's giving you the chance to bet on week 4 of the NFL season. All you have to do is go to FanDuel Sportsbook or download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Place a 3+ leg same game parlay with cash on any week 4 NFL game. If your bet loses, get a refund in site credit. Max refund is $10. Bet on week 4 of the NFL season with FanDuel by heading over to FanDuel Sportsbook today and placing a risk-free NFL same game parlay. Must be 21 plus and present in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. Refund issued as a non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max refund $10. Restrictions apply. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Same game parlay available for multiple sports in all states on mobile/web. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. For confidential help in Michigan, 1-800-270-7117. In Tennessee, call the Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. In West Virginia, 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Or in Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342.
Covering the present.
Let's bring Ryan McCrystal into covering the spread to talk some college football for week number 5 with a lot of big games on the schedule. Pretty radically different from the past couple of weeks in college football. So Ryan, big week ahead. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, really excited for us to kind of dive into the meat of the college football season now.
Yeah, it really is. It's going to be a fun one for sure. 4 different matchups between undefeated teams this week, at least 4 bigger ones. And we'll talk about 3 of those in a second. But first, this is the first time we've had you on since you joined Sharp Football Analysis. I was bummed when you were leaving because I loved your work over here at numberFire. But then I went from being like bummed to being like kind of jealous because you're working with like Rich Rebar, Dan Pizzuta, Warren Sharp. And I'm like, man, that's a fun team. So how are things going for you over there?
Yeah, things are going great. And yeah, it is a really fun team. We've got like a small group of guys, but we're all really dedicated to it and just having a lot of fun building things up over there.
And a lot of good, smart people to bounce ideas off of too, which I'm sure
Definitely
is helpful as always. Let's take a look at what's going on here right now. And Ryan, we're pretty deep into the season. I think it's okay to say that for week 5 game, we had week 0 as well. We've got, relevant samples on where we're good and where we're not in terms of betting, analysis, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're evaluating yourself, where have things gone well for you so far this year? And why do you think you've done well in those areas?
Yeah, I've gotten off to a really good start this year. And it's sort of like good news, bad news as to where I've done well, because I think where I've had the most success is I was able to pinpoint some teams last year who were probably a little bit overrated or underrated based on playing a shortened schedule, pretty much all Pac-12 and Big Ten teams. And I pretty much was batting 1,000 on pinpointing a few teams there, which, it's great. I got off to a good start, but then, the markets are going to adjust. And I think I already jumped off I was fading Northwestern and then had to jump off last week because against a really bad Ohio team, they were only favored by 14 points. And so I was like, all right, well, we've run out of luck here. The market has adjusted and realized that the downgrade from Peyton Ramsey to Hunter Johnson and Ryan Haliski, that was the reason why. I thought Peyton Ramsey didn't get nearly enough credit for what he brought to making that a really capable offense last year, in addition to losing some key pieces like Greg Newsome on defense. Yeah. I thought they were in for a real steep decline, and it has certainly played out that way. Indiana was another one that I have been betting against and will continue again this week. I'm going to take Penn State in that matchup with I believe it's 12-point spread right now. And basically that was a situation where I think another team that in a normal season, if they play their full schedule, they're probably like a good 8-4 team. But because they had so much success on not only a weird shortened schedule, but they got Penn State in one of the worst seasons in recent memory. They got Michigan in one of the worst seasons in Michigan's recent memory.
Right.
They got, they had an Ohio State team, which is obviously very good. And, it was a close game at the end, but Ohio State dominated that game for a good portion of it. They covered the spread at halftime. Were leading by 3 touchdowns well into the third quarter. But Justin Fields had a terrible game. He threw 3 interceptions, some of which were just brutal. And Ohio State just took the ball out of his hands late in that game, which allowed Indiana to come back. And this was before the Trey Sermon breakout. So their run game wasn't really able to just grind through the end of that game and around the clock. And so Indiana made it look a lot closer. And so I think that it just really pumped up Indiana a lot. And that was just, a really easy opportunity to fade them early this season.
Yeah.
And that's one that I think could, at least for another week, can maybe still be profitable. I don't think the market has really caught up to how mediocre that team is.
So, Ron, I do want to ask you about Indiana, because this is a team this preseason that I saw as a very high variance team. And the reason, we know they did well last year, but Penix was bad.
Yep.
And he was really good in 2019. So did you have confidence that he was not going to get back to his 2019 form as part of your analysis this preseason?
Yeah, I don't really think Penix was very good last year. I think he has an exceptional receiver, and Freifogel was just able to just do so much for him last year. Even in that Ohio State game, he had a monster game, and so much of it was all him and not it wasn't Penix fitting the ball into windows. It was, his receivers just going up and dominating Ohio State's cornerbacks, who obviously struggled last year. So it was something that they could take advantage of. And that's not going to continue on a week-to-week basis. There's a lot of, good to, strong defenses in the Big Ten that he has to go up against. And you just can't go through a schedule with a bad quarterback and expect your receiver to bail you out week after week in that schedule. So, yeah, Penix's performance last week was particularly bad. I don't think he's as bad as he looked at the end of that game. But I don't think he's the type of quarterback that can elevate, average talent to a 9 or 10 win season.
Yeah, for sure. My numbers really liked him in 2019, and that was the question for me. Was he going to get back to that? Yeah. The answer so far has been no, and interested to see how that unfolds.
Yeah.
Ryan, we did want to bring you here a little bit to talk about some Heisman odds. Matt Corral is now the favorite at plus 150. We got Bryce Young at plus 300. Any value in this market for you?
A little bit this year. It's interesting that you wanted to talk this up. I tend to stay away from the Heisman markets, maybe because I'm a little too close to it. When I used to write for ESPN for about 5 or 6 years, I wrote a weekly Heisman predictor article. I had a formula that we developed about 10 years or so ago, which did really well at predicting, going into the vote. And that I believe at the time we made it, I believe it went back correctly about 14 or 15 years. And then the 5 or 6 years we did it, it hit correctly every one except for literally the closest vote in Heisman history when Mark Ingram won. That was the 1 year where we missed. But doing that and looking at it so closely on a weekly basis, I just was intimately familiar with how you can't predict it in September. And the guys who are the front runners, you can often pick 3 or 4 names and there's a reasonable chance, one of those 3 or 4 names are going to be right. But I think because we talk about the Heisman so much right out of the gate, as opposed to the MVP and other sports, the odds adjust really quickly. So you talk about Corral, Bryce Young. I definitely don't think it's going to go to Corral. We don't see a lot of purely numbers-based Heisman winners, which is his candidacy. But Bryce Young very legitimately, is up there at the top. I could definitely see him winning it. But the numbers that you're getting to bet on that, there's just no value in it, I don't think. You just would have to risk too much to make a decent profit off of that. And so I just don't think it's worth it. But I do have 2 bets. I did place a bet on Travion Henderson at Ohio State. That was the first bet I got on last week, and then I placed another one on Dorian Thompson-Robinson this week. And the way that I approach it when I do look at the Heisman market is to try to look about storylines. And again, just from following it so closely and seeing how the candidacies really evolve week to week, it's so much a storyline based award. The stats matter, of course, but the guys elevate with those Heisman moments that we talk about every year. And in addition to the specific moments, it's more just how is the perception of this player relative to their team and the opponents that they're facing. So the Henderson bet I placed is that we've seen Ohio State's defense really struggle. We've seen CJ Stroud look kind of up and down. We don't even know if he will be the quarterback throughout the whole season. So I feel if Ohio State rebounds, maybe they run the table and go to the college football playoff. It's certainly a possible outcome for them. The storyline will be Henderson carried them there. Here's this true freshman phenomenon who carried them. And I mean, if that happens, who knows if he wins, but very good chance he's a finalist based on the numbers. And a similar thing with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Part of the reason I jumped on that was the odds are 15,000, plus 15,000 right now, which is just absurd. There's some players with absolutely zero chance, including, Mayan Williams, Ohio State's now backup running back, has better odds than him. Why? Who knows? So part of it was just the odds were just so great, but there's a legitimate storyline that I can piece together for him. If UCLA wins their next 3 games, which are very winnable, they'll go into that game with Oregon. Huge national attention. Chip Kelly versus Oregon. The winner of this game becomes the Pac-12 front runner, chance to go to the playoff. If he carries them to a win in that game, suddenly he's among those top 4 or 5 names. And so getting him at such long odds right now just felt he certainly is a long shot, but within a couple weeks, there's a very clear storyline path to him that's skyrocketing up. So when I do bet, those are sort of the things that I go for.
Well, I'm curious. You said you were building out this model for ESPN, and it is a narrative-based award. How do you account for narratives when you're trying to build out something that's quantitative? Are you doing search traffic, or what? How are you able to quantify that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think if we were doing it now, we might actually do something. I think it would be interesting. You could certainly probably use some Twitter data and whatnot, social media interactions to. But at the time when we did it, I think 2008 was the first year, so we weren't using that. Twitter hadn't really blown up yet, So the way that we tried to capture that was looking specifically at performances in big games. You got a big boot. I forget exactly. I haven't kept up with it since I stopped writing it a few years ago. But I think it was you got performances. You got based on your stats in big games against top 10 opponents, and then you got a further boost if you won the game. And so that's tried to capture some of that storyline type, because that's certainly those games where the most eyeballs are on you are the games that matter. If you have a bad game where no one's watching, there's a lot of Heisman winners who have some bad games on their resumes, but you can completely erase that by playing well in a big upset over a top 5 team or something like that.
Right. And that tracks with last year, Devontae Smith showing out in those huge games at the end of the year. Obviously he won it. He had pushed himself towards it before then too, but that pretty much sealed the deal there. So that's a really interesting way to attack that. I also want to talk, because, we're not talking to Ohio State Rutgers this week, but we've got you here, we might as well talk some Ohio State. What's your sentiment on them heading into this matchup with Rutgers?
This is a tough one. I'm probably going to stay away from betting this game this week. Rutgers is one of the teams I mentioned at the beginning, figuring out teams in the Big Ten and Pac-12. Betting on Rutgers has been a profitable strategy so far this season. I like what Shiano's doing there. They actually have a couple playmakers. Bo Melton is a stud on offense, and so they're much improved. I don't know what to make of them going into this matchup in particular. Ohio State has just been so hard to figure out, and so much of the changes that they've been making, especially on the defensive side of the ball, is one of the reasons why I'm not quite sure how to bet Ohio State right now. Obviously, they made that change with the play caller, giving the defensive play calling duties over to Matt Barnes, taking it away from Kerry Combs. So Barnes has now had 2 games. In the first game, he seemed to shift much more dramatically towards using man coverage, which Ohio State had previously excelled at for a long time under Urban Meyer. But then last week, he scrapped that and basically ran all zone. So I think he's still just sort of like tinkering with things. So I'm kind of hesitant to bet Ohio State at all for a couple of weeks until we kind of figure out, until I can anticipate what their game plan is going to be into a game. It's hard to evaluate how any team is going to match up with them.
So do you feel like, do you feel like the defense is going to get better?
I think it has the potential to, because one of the weak links early on has been the secondary, and it's very young. Mm-hmm. And they do have some good coaches. Matt Barnes was a secondary coach, and he has a good track record there. Kerry Combs, before he was the defensive coordinator, had an exceptional track record as the secondary coach at Ohio State. So I do have some amount of confidence in their ability to coach up the young players and maybe eliminate some of the mistakes. Some of the, there's other issues. The pass rush has been underperforming relative to expectations. That was supposed to be the area where the defense is really strong right out of the gate. The linebackers are also very inexperienced. Don't really know what to expect from them. But when you have a lot of young players, obviously you can have reasonable hope for improvement throughout the season. So I do think it's possible that they'll look a lot better by season's end. But who knows? Like the tinkering that they're doing, that can really mess with young players too. So, I think it could really go either way at this point.
Yeah, Ohio State has had such a ridiculous track record of defensive backs going to the NFL. The pass defense has been so good for over a decade, and that just kind of stopped last year. And they got to fix it if they're going to get back to the national prominence. You did mention that you weren't sure whether CJ Stroud was going to be the quarterback for the rest of the year. You did tweet earlier that you had confidence in Ryan Day to get this decision right. Where are you with the pass offense?
I'm pretty optimistic. I think CJ Stroud is probably going to remain the starter once he's healthy. Day has certainly indicated that. But there is obviously a lot of pressure on them to win right now. So if he has a couple mediocre games, I wouldn't be stunned if he changed course. But my stance on having confidence is basically just putting a little bit of blind faith, or I guess you wouldn't necessarily call it blind faith in Ryan Day, because he's coached more first-round draft picks than every other Ohio State coach in history. He's already produced 2. The 2 quarterbacks, he was there as the offensive coordinator and Dwayne Haskins, and then Justin Fields, obviously. The rest of Ohio State's history, they only had Art Schlichter. So I've got to give him a huge benefit of the doubt that he has watched these guys in practice and has picked the guy that he thinks is at their best to lead the team. And, I suspect that not only has he picked the guy that he has confidence in, but there's probably been a gap based on how he handled the injury. It was obvious. The first time I noticed it was in the Oregon game, where CJ Stroud, after a lot of throws, especially in the second half, was kind of stretching out his shoulder a little bit, like just kind of rolling his shoulder. You could tell it was bothering him. Heading into that game, there were a lot of message board rumors about the shoulder being an injury. I didn't hear them discuss it on the broadcast. I didn't watch every second of the game, so maybe they mentioned it, I missed it. But I don't believe they did. But just the fact that you could actually see him rolling his shoulder and trying to stretch it out during the game made it pretty obvious that it was bothering him. So the fact that he went with Stroud and stuck with him while he was clearly not 100% against Minnesota and Oregon, it kind of tells me that, and even against Tulsa, it kind of tells me that maybe Day thought, you know what, we're not as good as we were in the past. Maybe we need this guy because he is significantly better. So let's go with, 80, 90%, whatever he thought he was, of Stroud through those first couple of games. And then Akron comes around and it's like, okay, the shoulder's still bothering him. McCord's fine. We're going to beat Akron, no problem. That's purely a guess on my part, but just seeing that he clearly wasn't 100% and he still stuck with Stroud through all of that, even as he was struggling at times, it tells me that Day probably thinks that there's a pretty good gap. And as far as Stroud's progression, I just have to put some faith in Day and his track record so far.
Yeah, I would agree. As someone who lives here in Ann Arbor, I think you still have to give Ohio State the benefit of the doubt. You do see the struggles on defense, but they probably might figure it out. Ryan, as an Ohio State fan, let me throw this at you. Where are you looking? Where are you on Michigan right now?
I'm kind of wait and see. Obviously, you've got to be impressed by what they've done with the run game. And that can carry you a really long way in the Big Ten. It could possibly carry you to an undefeated season right up until the Ohio State game. But to get past Ohio State, they have to throw the ball. And they haven't proven that they can do that yet. So I have to say that I'm just sort of at that wait and see mode for them, and might be there all the way up until the Ohio State game. They might not need to throw the ball a whole lot with the way the run game has looked. But then, Ohio State, even against a good defense, they're going to put up points. And in a game like that, Michigan can probably continue to run the ball on Ohio State. Like that's not going to be a problem based on what we've seen from their defense. Even if they improve a little bit, they're not going to suddenly shut down a really good run game like Michigan's. But when you can throw the ball like Ohio State can, you just have more margin for error. Like, let's say Ohio State makes a couple mistakes early in the game and they fall behind by 2 touchdowns going into halftime. They're fine. They can come back and make up 2 touchdown difference on Michigan. But what if Michigan does that? What if they make a couple of mistakes and they fall behind by 2 touchdowns on Ohio State going into the second half, maybe even going into the fourth quarter? Maybe they're in trouble. I don't know. We haven't really seen them in that situation where they have to throw the ball. But I think, given those 2 potential outcomes, you'd certainly have to give more benefit of the doubt to Ohio State at this point, just because we know that they at least have a decent passing game and can make up a deficit. Michigan, we really have no idea what it looks like right now.
Yeah, I think having outs, ways to get out of bad situations is kind of a key and something that we don't know about as of yet. So let's move now into the big games coming up this week, starting off with Arkansas at Georgia. Georgia, 18.5-point favorite here. Total is 48.5, and Arkansas is undefeated. One of these games where both teams undefeated. They had good wins, but they came at weird times because Casey Thompson didn't play most of that first Texas game. Zach Calzada got the start for A&M there off the injury. So how much stock are you putting into those wins for Arkansas and just their 4-0 start in general?
Yeah, it's sort of the tale of 2 stories for me with them, offense and defense. I'm 100% buying the defense, mostly because of the pass rush. They're blitzing at the second lowest rate in the country so far, and they're still getting pressure at 44 or a 41% clip, which included a 44% rate against Texas A&M, which has good pass protection. So I'm 100% buying into the defense. If you can get pressure when you're only bringing 4 pass rushers, you have an exceptional defense, because it just, when you blitz a quarterback, a good quarterback knows that somewhere out there, there's a one-on-one matchup that I can try to take advantage of more often than not. When you can get pressure with only 4, it doesn't matter how good the quarterback is at processing, that matchup might not be out there. And so you're going to force a quarterback into situations where they're either taking sacks, just holding on to the ball and going down, or they're taking big risks. And, that's just the ability to do that. That's just such a huge asset to a defense to be able to force quarterbacks into those situations. And the fact that we saw them do that against Texas A&M, even though the quarterback play was down, the offensive line is still very good, and they should have been able to protect, their quarterback regardless of who was back there. So I have a lot of faith in Arkansas's pass rush. I think they're going to give Georgia problems this weekend. Offense, I don't know. I'm still kind of figuring out what KJ Jefferson is. He's been kind of mediocre under pressure so far, and they haven't protected them. He was pressured 52% of the time against Texas A&M last week. And so, you have a quarterback like that with inexperience, even though he's mostly looked good, Georgia's going to get a lot of pressure on him too. And, it can just be one or two bad mistakes that he makes against a really opportunistic defense like that. And suddenly the game is kind of like, it could snowball out of control. So, it's a situation where the spread's so big because I think Arkansas's defense is so big. I'm definitely leaning that way, but I don't know. I don't have a ton of confidence. I'm trying to talk myself into Arkansas, maybe even putting a little bit on the Arkansas money line, just thinking if they can get, a turnover or two on defense that, they could pull off a big upset. I'm kind of trying to talk myself into that, but I don't know if you guys are with me on Arkansas. I'd be curious to hear because I'm trying to lean that way further.
Well, you're kind of making me think about the total in this game because you have faith in the Arkansas defense, maybe not as much in the offense. Are you thinking under 48.5, or is that one also a bit muddy for you?
Yeah, that's a tough one because again, I think we're looking at a game where either side could commit multiple turnovers. And that can obviously quickly ratchet up the score. So it's probably one where I'm I would lean under, but I don't know because I don't have a ton of faith in either quarterback.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, my numbers Georgia in this game have them by a little bit more than 20. So, kind of in a year devoid of some of our traditional powers, and even Alabama doesn't look quite as good as they were last year. My numbers seem to like Georgia at this point. So we'll see. Obviously, this is some tough competition in this inter division matchup.
Let's go to Cincinnati at Notre Dame now. Cincinnati 1.5 point favorite here, and the total's 50.5. And Ryan, you tweeted, I think it's September 6th, if I remember correctly, about how you thought the wrong team was favored in this game. Notre Dame was favored at the time. Obviously, that has since flipped. So you were on Cincinnati from the jump. What put you on them initially?
Yeah, this line was available over the summer and I bet Cincinnati, I think it was 2.5. They were getting 2.5 and I bet it then. And then I think the tweet that you're referencing was after week 1. Yeah. I went back because I gained a little more confidence after Notre Dame's week 1 performance and it was still available at that number. So I went back and doubled down on it. And there was a couple of factors for me. It was number one, Cincinnati returns just a ton of talent on defense. It was a great defense last year. Just returning almost everybody gave me a ton of confidence. The secondary gets a lot of the publicity. Ahmad Gardner is a potential first-round pick. He's a stud. Kobe Bryant, Arquon Bush. They've got some really studs back there in the secondary. But specific to this matchup, they return almost their entire front seven. Myjai Sanders and Joel DeBlanco are their two big pass rushers. Sanders is sort of the every down pass rusher. DeBlanco, he's kind of a linebacker, 50-50 split pass rush, dropping back in coverage. And he's been a beast this year. He's actually getting pressure on 40% of his blitzes, which is incredible. And so looking at that strength relative to Notre Dame, where we've had, most teams around the country brought back a lot of talent, Notre Dame didn't. They specifically lost a lot of talent on the offensive line. I believe it was 3 starters. I might have that number slightly off, but they lost a lot of their best offensive linemen. And then they also lost Ian Book's mobility, which as a pure passer, the difference between Book and Cone, I don't know if there's a huge difference. You could maybe even talk me into Cone being a little bit better based on what we've seen from at his best moments. But Book, if you take away sacks and kneel downs, Book averaged almost 50 yards a game on the ground for Notre Dame last year. That was a huge part of their offense. Not just his production on the ground, but just being able to avoid pressure, make plays outside the pocket, and Cone can't do that. That's going to be an issue when you're facing a defense like Cincinnati. And then, specific to, when I made that tweet after the first game, we saw Notre Dame's offensive line. I was expecting them to take a step back. I did not expect them to be terrible. This is an awful offensive line. They can't block in the run game. They can't protect the quarterback. It's absolutely one of the worst in the country. And they're going up against one of the best. It's hard to quantify where a group of 5 team stacks up, but I'm comfortable saying that this is at least a top 15 pass rush in the country for Cincinnati. It's an awful offensive line for Notre Dame. So that's a huge mismatch that just, when your quarterback starts feeling pressured and panicking, Notre Dame saw it from the flip side last week, how that game against Wisconsin was kind of maybe within reach. And then Graham Mertz just absolutely, just complete implosion because he was feeling some of that pressure. And that could very easily happen to Notre Dame this week. The game could snowball out of control if the pressure is too much. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to bet this week because obviously I'm thrilled to have gotten it at even better numbers a couple weeks ago. But, I think you said it was at 1.5. If I weren't already on it, I think I'd still be on that for Cincinnati. I think they're a fairly significantly better team. Certainly I would bet it up to 2.5 if it goes that direction.
Ryan, Jack Cohn's still listed as questionable. I don't know if you have any more information on that, but clearly probably a little bit of a downgrade if he can't go in this big matchup.
Yeah, probably. And it sounds like, based on a little bit of what we saw from Pine last week, he's probably not an upgrade in terms of mobility. So that potential advantage that I think we've identified with Cohn, the downgrade from Book to Cohn, not being able to move outside the pocket, I think that's probably still an issue, even if Cohn can't go. So, yeah, I think regardless of who's back there, Cincinnati has just a huge advantage, probably being able to overwhelm that Notre Dame offensive line.
Excellent. All right, let's head to our last game. We got Ole Miss at Alabama. Alabama's a 14.5-point favorite. Massive total of 79.5. I think Nick Saban probably would have puked if he would have seen a total like this 10 years ago. But, so obviously pace of play matters. What do you see in this game?
Yeah, I mean, Ole Miss is going to come out and they're going to play their style of football. I think that it's just so ingrained in who they are. They want to play fast, not just to increase possessions and, force the other team into a shootout, but it's so much a part of how they have success. The types of plays that they're calling, they're trying to get the ball quickly, and those plays are going to be more successful when you have the defense on their heels. They're just hoping to catch the defense off balance, maybe out of position on a play. Corral so far this season, he's only taken a traditional drop back 27% of the time. So the overwhelming majority of the time, they're taking one-step dropbacks or RPOs and just trying to get the ball out quickly. And because they're moving at such a fast pace, they know that no matter what defense they're playing, a handful of plays per game, the defense is going to be out of position and they're going to be able to break off some long plays. Even against Alabama, which we saw last year, it happened. They're going to be able to force any defense to make mistakes because Corral is so good. The receivers are so well in tune with him that they can run at that pace and they're not going to be the ones to make mistakes. And a couple of times a game, the defense will make mistakes. And so I think that their hope in this game is basically we're going to play our style of football. We're going to run up and down the field. You're going to make some mistakes. We're going to score. Hopefully you're not as good at doing this as we are, which, Alabama is deservedly a heavy favorite in this game, but maybe the fact that Bryce Young is inexperienced, the more inexperienced quarterback in this game, if you try to force him to pick up the pace, maybe you can force him to make some of the mistakes that Corral is unlikely to make when Ole Miss is on offense. So I'm probably going to stay away from betting this game, but I would give Ole Miss a sliver of a chance just based on the possibility that Young makes some rookie mistakes.
Well, I'm curious, if you were in Ole Miss's shoes, would you keep the foot on the gas, just from a coaching perspective, to try to keep that advantage you were talking about? Or would you try to increase the variance, slow this game down, and muck it up a bit? Because I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But also, I just want to limit the time Alabama can throttle me, basically.
I definitely understand that argument. I think I would just have to sort of gauge my personnel and decide what I was comfortable with. Because the other, not only, if you slow the game down, there's fewer possessions, there's more variance in those games, but you would also gain an advantage of maybe catching Alabama off guard a little bit if you mixed up your offense a little bit. So there would be some advantage to doing that, maybe, but you would have to trust your offense to still be explosive because you are still going to have to put up points because Alabama is going to put up points on your defense. So I wouldn't necessarily immediately lean towards doing that just because I've got the veteran quarterback in this game. I know I have talented receivers. I know I'm going to score points against Alabama. Maybe if I run up and down the field and put a ton of pressure on Bryce Young, he's going to make, like I said before, he's the more inexperienced quarterback in this game. There's a possibility he costs Alabama the game by trying too hard to keep pace. If Ole Miss is able to gain a lead at some point, maybe he forces some passes. I'm certainly not betting on that happening, but I do see that being a potential outcome.
Yeah, you can see a path that happening. I think that's smart to point out, even if you're not going to bet it. Being aware that is a path that could occur.
Well,
okay, so you talked a bit
Jim,
about.
wait, hold on,
go
Jim.
ahead.
But isn't we got to put the Jim Saunas revenge angle after what Ole Miss did to Alabama's defense last year, right? So
I mean, there's a lot of revenge angles in this game. Like,
yeah, two teams that play every year. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
stabs that know
I
each
don't
other
see.
too. Yeah.
From the defensive side, though, like even if you're looking at it from the revenge angle, the defense wants to get revenge, but can you when you have such a talented offense playing?
And I think that's really the main question in college football, right? I mean, we saw elite offenses just do whatever they want against even good defenses like Alabama last year. And so in some sense, this game to me is Ole Miss really an elite offense, in the mold of what Alabama did last year, Ohio State did last year. We'll see.
Yeah, I think the revenge angle is something I always love just to talk about for funsies. I don't know if it's a good, Lane Kiffin is one of the weird dudes where he's such an odd duck that I don't think I can apply it to him, even jokingly, because I don't know the way his mind operates. So I don't even know if I can do this as a joke anymore, but we'll see. It should be a fun game either way. Hopefully we get a lot of points in this one. You talked a bit about Penn State, Indiana, potentially being a game you might be betting this week. Any other games standing out to you as presenting value for week 5?
Yeah, there's two others. The first one I'd actually be curious to hear your take on too, because I'm kind of second guessing myself based on how the line has moved. When I saw that Clemson was favored by over 2 touchdowns, it opened at 14.5 against Boston College. My immediate reaction was, why on earth wouldn't I take Boston College when Clemson hasn't even scored more than 14 points in regulation against an FBS opponent? That just jumps out to me as just I just can't imagine them covering that big of a spread when they've started out. Boston College, you can make an argument, is probably the worst defense that they have faced, throwing away the FCS game, obviously, but it's not like they're a bottom feeder type of defense either. They've been very good against the run. Their lack of a pass rush is really the one potential issue that they've had, but then Clemson's offensive line is terrible. So maybe their pass rush is actually decent in this game. So, and then Boston College has a capable offense. So I feel like I would feel really good about it if Phil Dracovic was still back there. I feel less, I'm a little more hesitant with Dennis Grosel at quarterback, but he's got, I believe, 10 starts in his career under his belt now. He's proven to be a capable starting quarterback. They have some good playmakers. Obviously, Zay Flowers is a playmaker. Freshman receiver Jaden Williams has looked good in some games so far this season. So I just feel like they're not going to get shut out. And so, the implied total for Clemson this game is 30 points. Why would we expect them to be able to do that after what we've seen against some other, okay defenses? NC State is not a powerhouse defense. So I don't know. Are you guys strongly on Clemson? I feel like I'm second guessing myself because the line has actually gone up now since it opened at that big number. Yeah,
that's kind of funny. I actually do like Clemson in this game, and it's partially because of some of my adjusted numbers. I think the past defenses that Clemson have played, Georgia was first, North Carolina State's 9th, and Georgia Tech was almost top 25. And this is all based on this year's data, so small sample size, right? So, and Boston College is 90th or something terrible. So I think along with that, I think it's a big step down in competition from the adjusted success rates that I'm looking at, and I think that's a big reason. I think Clemson is clearly not what they were last year, but now the game is to figure out how far have they fallen, right? Are they still good enough to win the division? Probably, in the same way that I still give Ohio State that same benefit of the doubt. I think we still need to with Clemson and, and Boston College. Their offense has been good, but how much of that is the quarterback? Probably a lot. So, So anyways, those are kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I feel like it's a Dabo after the first couple of weeks narrative of Dabo doesn't try too hard the first couple of weeks. We'll buy in after that. Yeah. And it's, given their schedule this year, I don't think that narrative really applies. So
no, it doesn't apply.
I'm still skeptical, pretty skeptical of that team for sure. Let's talk to you now about the other game you had in your mind. What was the other one besides Clemson?
Yeah, the other one is a game. I'm actually on USC this week. They're giving 7.5 against Colorado. This is mostly about just wanting to fade Colorado. I just think that their quarterback play has been just abysmal. Brendan Lewis has been awful, and he's specifically been bad when he's pressured and against blitzes. He's averaging 4.7 adjusted net yards per attempt against the blitz, which is down near the bottom. And USC blitzes 44% of the time, and they have success when blitzing. The defense, that area has not been one of their issues this season. So I just think this is a situation where, a shutout is in play here. USC doesn't need to be great on offense. And the other aspect that I think the reason why this line might be fairly low and why some people might be nervous about betting USC is just sort of like, they've already made a coaching change. They've already had a couple losses. Like, is this team going to quit? And I feel like the way they responded against Washington State right after the coaching change and had a nice performance there, I feel like I have a reasonable amount of confidence that, there's still a lot of motivation here for this team. This isn't just the wheels aren't going to come off yet. Maybe it happens later, especially if they have another brutal upset. If they were to lose this game, who knows what happens moving forward. But I feel like, they're still plowing forward and trying to make something out of this season. And so against a team like Colorado, where it just seems like they have no direction, no identity, I think that this game has the potential to just be an opportunity for USC to get things back on track and just sort of roll fairly easily.
And there's talent there.
Yeah, there's certainly talent there. I mean, I think they had that performance against Washington State with Jackson Dart as quarterback, and then he hurt himself, and now Keaton Slovis is back. And I expected that guy to be an NFL draft pick next year, and he doesn't seem to want that right now. So I think a lot of that depends on the quarterback play.
Yeah, definitely. The quarterback play needs to improve, but then they also, even if it doesn't get back to what it was, the receivers are still good. Drake London is an absolute stud. He's I think he's the front runner to an All-American receiver this year. The performance that he's had, his ability to stretch the field, which has been an area where USC has been kind of hit or miss over the last couple of seasons, just because so much of that offense is geared towards getting the ball out quickly. And now London has really elevated their ability to stretch the field a little bit. I could see their offense taking some steps over the next couple of weeks. And like I said, a team like Colorado that just seems to have no identity whatsoever, maybe this is an opportunity where they win big and get things back on track a little bit.
All right. Well, USC is 7.5-point favorite against Colorado on Saturday. That is Ryan McCrystal. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at Ryan_McCrystal and find his work over at Sharp Football Analysis. Ryan, we appreciate the time. Good luck to you both in college football and the NFL this week. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. This is fun.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Ryan McCrystal for swinging by and breaking down week 5 of college football. And Ed, I feel like we got to pencil down Ryan for the Ohio State-Michigan matchup later on this year, because it's cool to get the dueling perspectives, people who are like fully entrenched on both sides there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, I kind of sprung it on him, asking him about Michigan. I definitely told him I wanted to ask him about Ohio State, but I think it's good to get some unfiltered opinions. I think he actually agrees with a lot of Michigan fans who are still wait and see. We'll get an important data point, obviously, this weekend when they go to Camp Randall. But yeah, I'm always trying to check my biases. I think it'd be easier for me to see more gloom and doom in Ohio State, but I just don't think that's quite warranted yet. So we'll see where it goes.
So you were talking about that Michigan-Wisconsin game. Let's move into that now with covering the future. Right now, Wisconsin, 2.5-point favorite against Michigan. You talked about how Michigan fans were skeptical. Seems like sportsbooks still hesitant to buy in despite Graham Mertz's performance last week. So how are you viewing this game between the Wolverines and the Badgers?
I think this game is almost impossible to predict. By the end of what I'm going to talk about, you'll see that I'm not betting the side in this game. Michigan has looked great this year, and after 4 weeks, I have all my schedule adjustments, and Michigan is looking even better, partially because Western Michigan has beaten Pitt on the road. They dominated San Jose State at home last week. Michigan also really beat up on Northern Illinois, a team that beat Georgia Tech, that gave Clemson a game. So those are the things that are all kind of considered when I'm making schedule adjustments. And then, Wisconsin really hasn't had the best season. They've lost to Penn State in the opener. They lost to Notre Dame last week. They're a collective -7 in turnover margin in those two games. And you're not going to be a good competition when you do that. So let's just kind of look at the variety of predictions that you can make on this game. So preseason, I would have made Wisconsin a 7.5 point favorite in this game at home. And now we have 4 weeks of data. We make adjustments for it. And for Wisconsin, I actually didn't really downgrade them much after the Penn State game. I think they had more yards in that game, better yards per play. There's a couple turnovers late. I mean, Wisconsin did have a chance to win that game. Clearly, they did take a little bit of a downgrade after the Notre Dame game last week, and it wasn't just the turnovers. It was partially the score and the success rate metrics as well. So after that game finishes, we're probably looking at Wisconsin as a small favorite against Michigan. And then Michigan plays Rutgers, and they get out to a solid 20-3 lead at halftime. But then the offense just kind of shut down in the second half. Rutgers scores, really makes that a game. So my best predictor model that members have access to has Wisconsin by 4.7 points in this game. And FanDuel opened with Wisconsin as a 1 point favorite, has moved to 1.5. So it's kind of moving in the direction of my model. But if you really want to bet Wisconsin at this point with a quarterback in Graham Mertz that has really struggled in all facets of the game, I think that's a really hard sell right now. And with Michigan, we're also talking about whether the first 3 weeks were a mirage. So what I find most interesting is that now I'm running metrics based on data from the current season. Points, success rate, yards per play, put it together in the ratios that I found to be most predictive. And this model actually makes Michigan a 21 point favorite on the road. And again, a lot of that's at the strength of schedule adjustments, right? I mean, Washington is kind of bounced back, another team that the Michigan beat. Doesn't really think that highly of Wisconsin right now. And I think this just kind of goes to show you the range of outcomes from, one model saying Wisconsin's going to be a 5 point favorite to data from this year saying Michigan should be 21 points. I want nothing to do with the side, but I do think it's interesting, just the variety of outcomes that can happen in this game.
Right. I want to talk to you about that too, because you don't have to give an actual number, but how much of the number you give to your subscribers is 2021 data versus the prior? What's, you don't have to give the actual weighting, but how much of it is 2021 data versus the prior?
So that's the way that my model used to run 2019 and previously. So you'd have a preseason prior, and then you would work the data in, and the weight would get less. And at this point in the season, you'd still be pretty much on the preseason. Right. 4 games is not a lot. So, and then there's some other factors in there as well. So what I found last year in the necessity out of the pandemic was I came up with a different updating model. And so the prior model from 2019 and before, when you started weighting in the data from the current season, it tended to be kind of regressive to the mean. So you can kind of think of it regressing to what your expectation was preseason. Kind of when I made the schedule adjustments for the current season, it wasn't aggressive about changing an opinion on a team. So for example, Michigan this year, that has gotten off to a real good start. So with the updating model that I developed last year, what I found was it was actually making pretty aggressive adjustments, pretty aggressive changes on teams. And in college football, I think that's a really good thing. Chris Andrews has always talked about how you can follow momentum in college football. Things change from year to year, and you want to get that early data, and you want to move aggressively. You'll get killed following momentum in the NFL because salary cap, regression to the mean is just such a powerful force in that league. So I really do like the behavior of this new model. So in terms of percentage, and what I do now, so I have the new model that's more aggressive in changing on teams. That's what I told you about in terms of Wisconsin being about a 4.5 point favorite in this game. That's the model that all the metrics have actually been better than the closing value of the market so far this year. So I'm very pleased with that. And what I've done with the parts of that old model is that I also include them in the predictions or in the data file that I give to members, because I do think they give interesting things, so and that's part of what I talked about today in Michigan and Wisconsin.
Yeah. I was asking that because I've been grappling with that myself and building out my own NFL numbers, trying to decide, okay, how much do I weight in 2021 versus preseason? And I was looking at the way things grind out for this week. And I was curious the way it would work if I look back at what my preseason number said about the Browns versus the Vikings, because I like this bet quite a bit for week number 4. I want the Vikings +2 against the Browns. This game opened with the Vikings as 1.5-point dogs. It quickly moved to 2.5, and now it's back to 2. So I want to get back in on this one before it moves more and take the Vikings at +2. Interestingly enough, my preseason numbers, if I don't adjust at all, had the Vikings as 1.2 point favorites here, and it's actually improved in favor of the Vikings, despite the fact they're 1-2 to open the year. And it might be because potentially sportsbook's a bit high on the Browns here. They played well in week 1 against the Chiefs. They lost, but they played well. Week 2, Tyrod Taylor was kind of shredding them before he got hurt. Then in week 3, the defense played well, but a lot of that goes on the Bears' plan of attack in that game. So I think they're good. The Browns are 13th in my power rankings right now, but Minnesota playing really well offensively. They rank 5th in overall adjusted offensive efficiency just based on the 2021 data. They rank 2nd in passing efficiency. They moved the ball well this year, and they just haven't always had the wins to show for it. They lost to the Bengals in overtime, lost to the Cardinals on a missed chip shot field goal. We know the Cardinals are good based on what they've done the first 3 games, at least we think we do. And the Bengals defense hasn't been too bad. So my numbers have moved from the Vikings -1.2 to the Vikings -2.4. Instead, I'm getting 2 points on the Vikings for this game. So that could put me on the money line at +114, but I think this should be a pretty tight game and a pretty back and forth game. So I do want the points here with the Vikings +2. Excited to watch it play out, so I'll take the Vikings +2. But Ed, what are your numbers saying here? Because I feel like a bit strange being like, I like the Browns, so it feels weird to be against them. Right. I just don't know what I'm missing in this one, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland is a team that I kind of thought was overrated heading into the season. I'm rapidly changing that opinion of this team. I think they do deserve it. And, I think my model had them by like 10 last week against Chicago. They have them by just about a half point in this game. So certainly my model size with what you are saying here. And then I also wanted to point out that Dr. Eric Eager was on my show last week. And one of the things he said about PFF grades is that Kirk Cousins was playing better than their 0-2 record suggested. That clearly played out again in that game against Seattle. So I think all those things are pointing in the same direction for you.
Yeah. And I think that Cleveland is pretty similar to Seattle. Like they can score some points for sure, bit flawed at times defensively. So very similar matchup for Minnesota. They get them at home here. I don't weight home field a lot, so I was kind of surprised to see that the Vikings were undervalued at home. That doesn't happen It happened with Dallas last week, but it's been mostly on road teams. So I'm surprised to see Minnesota getting a good look here. But I'll take the Vikings +2 here against the Browns. That is all that we have for the college football version of this week's Covering the Spread. But back with more NFL tomorrow with Andy Molitor breaking down his favorite bets for week number 4 and the biggest games across the board. Andy is in Minnesota, so I'll have to get his thoughts on the Vikings versus the Browns as well. Make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread because of that to get that podcast right as it goes live. Big thank you to Ryan McCrystal as well. Find him on Twitter at Ryan_McCrystal and check out his work over at Sharp Football Analysis. Ed, what is going on for you this week over at the Power Rank?
I'm writing my email newsletter. You can check that out at thepowerrank.com. And members of the Power Rank have access to all of my best predictions. And, it was interesting, Jim, like last week, I had some problems with my code and I was just sitting there looking at raw success rates and I nearly pulled my hair out because there was a lack of adjustments. And especially in college football, it's so hard to put that into context right now. Even in the NFL, the adjustments have been pretty big. So I'm a very happy man being able to look at the adjusted numbers and seeing what they say about games like Clemson versus Boston College. So members have access to all of that. You can check that out at thepowerrank.net as a URL. That'll take you to a place on my site where you can learn more about becoming a member.
Perfect. Thepowerrank.net to get those numbers. Find Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank. I'm at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your bets across week 5 of college football. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to get you set for the NFL side of things. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.
What's up, guys? This is Jordan Spieth. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube channel.